Sebastian Renlo thought it was just another quiet evening of mopping floors at the towering North Point Financial Center until he heard this small voice echoing from the executive suite. Night after night, the same little girl sat alone on the marble steps, clutching a stuffed elephant and whispering, "Please don't leave me," to anyone who passed by. Most people hurried past in expensive suits, too busy to notice, but Sebastian couldn't ignore the tears in her bright green eyes. When he finally knelt down to comfort her one December evening, he discovered something that would shake him to his core. She wasn't some lost soul wandering the building. She was the daughter of Vivian Corlay, the billionaire CEO who commanded the entire 50-story tower. What he uncovered about their fractured relationship didn't just heal a broken family. It taught him that sometimes the richest people in the world are the poorest when it comes to love. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Sebastian Renlo had been pushing the same industrial mop across the marble floors of North Point Financial Center for exactly 2 years and 4 months, and he could navigate every corner of the 50-story tower with his eyes closed. The evening shift suited him perfectly. It started at 6 when the last executives hurried out to their waiting cars, and ended at midnight when the city below looked like scattered diamonds against black velvet. More importantly, it meant he could drop off 8-year-old Emma at his sister's house after school, work through the quiet hours when the building belonged to him and the security guards, and still be home to make breakfast before Emma caught the school bus. Single parenthood hadn't been in his plans, but then again, neither had losing Sarah to cancer when Emma was barely 3. Life had a way of rewriting your story whether you were ready or not. The North Point Financial Center stood like a glass monument to ambition in the heart of downtown Millbrook, its sleek exterior reflecting the lights of the city's financial district. During the day, it buzzed with the energy of $1,000 suits and million-dollar deals. Lawyers, accountants, investment managers, and corporate executives filled every floor with the hum of success. But after hours, it became Sebastian's domain, a cathedral of silence, where his footsteps echoed through empty corridors, and the only sounds were the gentle whoosh of the Vavix system and the distant hum of the elevator shafts. Sebastian took pride in his work, even if others might not understand why. Each night, he transformed the chaos left behind by busy professionals into pristine order. Coffee-stained conference tables became gleaming surfaces ready for tomorrow's presentations. Scuffed floors regained their mirror-like finish. Overflowing trash bins were emptied and lined with fresh bags. It was honest work, and it paid enough to keep Emma in her preferred art supplies and piano lessons. He developed his own rhythm over the months. Start with the ground floor lobby, that massive space with its soaring ceiling and abstract sculptures that probably cost more than he'd make in 5 years. Work his way up through the office floors, each one a maze of cubicles and corner offices. Save the executive levels for last, those upper floors where the real power players made decisions that affected thousands of lives. The 48th through 50th floors were his favorite. Not because they were easier to clean, if anything, they demanded more attention to detail, but because they offered the best views of the city, and sometimes, when he was polishing the floor-to-ceiling windows, Sebastian felt like he was suspended between earth and sky, part of something larger than himself. Tonight felt different from the moment he swiped his keycard at the employee entrance. Maybe it was the December air that seemed to carry extra weight, or the way the building's Christmas decorations cast strange shadows in the lobby. Or maybe it was just the approaching holiday season, which always made him more aware of Emma's questions about why they couldn't afford the kinds of toys her classmates talked about. Sebastian methodically assembled his cleaning cart in the supply room. Industrial-grade floor cleaner, glass cleaner that wouldn't streak, microfiber cloths, trash bags, the ancient but reliable vacuum cleaner, that sounded like a jet engine but never failed to do its job. He'd learned to pack everything efficiently, minimizing trips back to restock supplies. As he wheeled the cart toward the elevators, his mind wandered to the conversation he'd had with Emma that morning. She'd asked why some people lived in big houses with swimming pools while they lived in their small 2-bedroom apartment above Mrs. Henderson's garage. How do you explain economic inequality to an 8-year-old without making her feel ashamed of their circumstances or bitter toward those who had more? He'd settled on telling her that different families had different kinds of wealth. Some had money, others had love and creativity and strength. Their family, he'd said, was rich in the things that really mattered. Emma had seemed satisfied with that answer, but Sebastian knew the questions would get harder as she grew older. The elevator carried him to the 10th floor, where he began his nightly routine. The law offices here were always the messiest. Lawyers apparently survived on coffee and worked through meals, leaving behind a trail of crumbs, sticky notes, and forgotten coffee cups. Sebastian had learned not to disturb the carefully arranged stacks of documents, even when they looked like complete chaos to his untrained eye. As he worked, Sebastian found himself thinking about the different lives that intersected within these walls. The young associate who kept a picture of her golden retriever on her desk and worked until 10 every night. The senior partner whose office was filled with family photos, but who Sebastian had never seen leave before 9 p.m. The secretary who brought homemade cookies for the entire floor every Friday and remembered everyone's birthday. Each desk told a story if you knew how to read the signs. The stressed middle manager whose trash bin overflowed with antacid wrappers. The ambitious junior executive who stayed late to impress the bosses, but fell asleep at his desk, evident from the pillow marks on his cheek that Sebastian sometimes noticed in the morning security footage. Sebastian had developed a theory during his months of cleaning up after these people. Success wasn't as simple as it appeared from the outside. Yes, they made more money than he did, probably more in a month than he made in a year. But many of them seemed just as trapped in their routines as he was in his, just at a different altitude. The work was meditative in its way. Push the mop in long, smooth strokes, spray and wipe down surfaces. Empty bins, replace supplies, move to the next office. Each task completed perfectly before moving on to the next. There was something satisfying about the transformation he created each night, turning disorder into order, preparing spaces for the next day's possibilities. By the time Sebastian reached the upper floors, it was nearly 9 o'clock. The executive levels were different from the rest of the building. More space between offices, thicker carpets, art that looked like it belonged in museums. The silence up here felt deeper, more complete. These floors had their own atmosphere of power and privilege that lingered even after their occupants went home to their mansions and penthouse apartments. It was on the 49th floor that Sebastian first heard it, a sound so soft and unexpected that he almost convinced himself he'd imagined it. A gentle sniffling, the kind that comes from someone trying very hard not to cry out loud. He stopped pushing his mop and listened carefully, wondering if the building's ventilation system was making unusual noises. There it was again. Definitely human, definitely sad, and definitely coming from somewhere near the executive conference room. Sebastian abandoned his cart and followed the sound, his soft-soled work shoes making no noise on the polished marble. As he rounded the corner toward the conference room, he saw her, a small figure sitting on the wide steps that led up to the executive suite, knees drawn up to her chest, arms wrapped around what appeared to be a stuffed elephant. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old, with long dark hair that fell in waves around her shoulders, and a dress that probably cost more than Sebastian's monthly rent. Even in the dim after-hours lighting, he could see that everything about her spoke of privilege, from her tiny patent leather shoes to the delicate gold bracelet on her wrist. But privilege couldn't disguise the universal language of a lonely, frightened young one. Her small shoulders shook with the effort of silent crying, and when she lifted her head, Sebastian caught a glimpse of green eyes bright with unshed tears. His first instinct was to approach her, ask if she was okay, find out how a young girl had ended up alone in a corporate building after 9 at night. But something held him back. Sebastian had learned to be cautious around the children of wealthy families. They often came with complications he couldn't afford to navigate. Misunderstandings, accusations, protective parents who assumed the worst about working-class men, who showed interest in their offspring. Instead, he watched from a distance, trying to understand the situation. How had she gotten here? Where were her parents? Was someone coming back for her, or had she somehow been forgotten in the exodus of evening departures? The girl seemed unaware of his presence. She rocked slightly back and forth, whispering something to her stuffed elephant that Sebastian couldn't quite hear. Occasionally, she would look toward the elevator bank, as if expecting someone to appear. When the elevator dinged and opened to reveal only the security guard making his rounds, her face would fall with fresh disappointment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sebastian retreated to his cleaning cart, unsure how to proceed. His protective instincts warred with his practical knowledge that getting involved with someone else's family situation could complicate his life in ways he couldn't afford. He had Emma to think about, a job he needed to keep, a carefully balanced existence that provided stability, if not luxury. But as he resumed mopping, pretending to focus on his work while keeping the girl in his peripheral vision, Sebastian found it impossible to ignore her quiet desperation. She wasn't throwing a tantrum or demanding attention like some children might. Instead, she sat with the patient hopelessness of someone who had learned not to expect rescue. The security guard, Frank Morrison, appeared around the corner on his regular patrol. Sebastian had worked alongside Frank long enough to know he was a decent man, a former police officer who took his responsibilities seriously but wasn't unkind. Frank's flashlight beam swept across the hallway and landed on the small figure. "Hey there, sweetheart," Frank said gently, approaching the steps. "What are you doing up here so late?" The girl looked up at him with those startlingly green eyes. When she spoke, her voice was clear but small, like she was used to not being heard even when she tried to speak up. "I'm waiting for Mommy. She said she'd only be a few more minutes, but that was a really long time ago." Frank glanced at his watch, then looked around the empty hallway. "Where did you last see your mom, honey?" The girl pointed toward the corner office at the end of the hall, the one with the nameplate that read, Vivian Corley, Chief Executive Officer. Sebastian felt something cold settle in his stomach. Everyone in the building knew about Vivian Corley, even if they'd never seen her up close. She was the woman who'd built Northpoint Financial from nothing into one of the most powerful investment firms on the East Coast. Brilliant, ruthless, worth more money than Sebastian could comprehend, and apparently, she was this little girl's mother. "She's in a very important meeting," the girl continued, her voice taking on the careful cadence of someone repeating words they'd heard many times. "She said I should wait right here and be very quiet, and someone would come get me when it's time to go home." Frank looked uncomfortable. Sebastian could practically see him calculating the delicate social dynamics at play. Vivian Corley wasn't someone whose parenting you questioned, even indirectly. She was the kind of person who could end careers with a phone call. "Well, I'm sure she'll be out soon," Frank said finally. "But it's getting pretty late for a young lady like you to be sitting in a hallway. Are you warm enough? Do you need anything?" The girl shook her head politely. "I'm okay. Elephant keeps me company." She hugged the stuffed animal closer. "Mommy says good things come to people who wait patiently." There was something heartbreaking about the way she recited those words, as if she'd been practicing patience for far longer than any young person should have to. Frank looked around helplessly. clearly wanting to help but unsure how to navigate the situation without overstepping boundaries. "I'll check back on you in a little while, okay?" he said finally. "If you need anything at all, just call out." Sound travels really well in these hallways. The girl nodded and returned to her quiet vigil. Frank walked back toward Sebastian, shaking his head. "That's rough," he said quietly. "Boss lady's been in that office since about noon, and I haven't seen anyone go in or out in hours. Meeting must be running really late." Sebastian nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He'd heard stories about high-powered executives who brought their children to the office during school breaks or when childcare fell through, but this seemed different. There was something too practiced about the girl's resignation, too familiar about her ability to wait alone in a hallway for hours. After Frank continued his patrol, Sebastian found himself glancing toward the executive suite every few minutes. The girl remained on the steps, sometimes playing quiet games with her elephant, sometimes just sitting in that heartbreakingly patient pose. When she thought no one was looking, she would wipe away tears with the back of her hand as Sebastian worked his way through the 49th floor. He tried to piece together what he was witnessing. Clearly, this wasn't the first time the girl had been left to wait while her mother worked late. The casual way she'd settled onto the steps, the supplies she'd apparently brought with her, he could see a small backpack beside her, and her practiced responses to Frank's questions all suggested a routine that had been established over time. But understanding the situation didn't make it easier to witness. Every time Sebastian heard her small sigh or saw her check the hallway hopefully when the elevator dinged, he felt a twist in his chest that reminded him of Emma's worst days after Sarah died, those long afternoons when she'd sit by the window, waiting for a mother who would never come home again. By 10:30, Sebastian had finished the 49th floor, but he found himself reluctant to move up to the 50th floor. Leaving felt like abandonment, even though he barely knew this girl and had no real obligation to her. She remained on the steps, now lying on her side with her head pillowed on her backpack, the elephant clutched tightly against her chest. The next evening, Sebastian arrived at work with the girl on his mind. He'd spent his day off thinking about her patient wait in the hallway, wondering if she'd eventually been collected by her mother, or if someone else had come for her. The image of her curled up on those marble steps with only a stuffed elephant for comfort had haunted him through his attempts to focus on Emma's homework and their evening routine. As he prepared his cleaning cart, Sebastian found himself hoping it had been a one-time occurrence. Maybe Vivian Corley had simply had an unusually long meeting that day. Maybe the girl had been picked up shortly after his shift ended, and tonight she would be safely at home where she belonged. But as his elevator rose toward the upper floors, Sebastian felt his stomach tighten with anticipation and dread. When the doors opened on the 49th floor, he immediately looked toward the executive suite. She was there again. This time, she sat cross-legged on the steps, a small coloring book spread across her lap and a box of crayons scattered around her. The elephant sat nearby, propped against the marble railing as if keeping watch. She worked with the intense concentration that young ones bring to their art, tongue poking out slightly as she carefully stayed within the lines. Sebastian's heart sank. This wasn't a one-time emergency. This was a pattern he tried to focus on. His work, starting with the offices farthest from the executive suite to give himself time to think. But concentration proved impossible. Every few minutes, he found his attention drifting to the small figure on the steps, noting the details that painted a picture of prolonged waiting. Tonight, she'd come more prepared. Along with the coloring book and crayons, he could see a small thermos that probably contained juice or milk, and what looked like a bag of crackers. Someone had planned for this to be a long wait, either the girl herself, based on previous experience, or an adult who knew how late the evening would run. Frank made his patrol around 9:15. Sebastian was close enough to hear their exchange. "Back again tonight, I see," Frank said gently. He'd adopted the tone adults use with children they've begun to worry about, warm but carefully neutral. "Hung," the girl replied, not looking up from her coloring. "Mommy has another really important meeting. She said this one might take even longer than yesterday. Are you sure you're comfortable out here? I could probably find you a more comfortable place to wait." The girl shook her head quickly. "No, thank you. Mommy said to wait right here so she can find me when she's ready. I don't want to make her worry by being somewhere else." Frank glanced toward Vivian Corlez's office, where light still gleamed behind closed blinds. Sebastian could see him, struggling with the same conflicting impulses that had been plaguing Sebastian himself. The desire to help warring with the knowledge that interfering with a powerful executive's family arrangements could have serious consequences. "Well, you're being very patient," Frank said finally. "What are you coloring there?" The girl held up her book to show him a half-finished picture of a house surrounded by flowers. "It's a house where families spend time together," she said matter-of-factly. "Everyone is home for dinner and nobody has to work late." The innocence of the statement hit Sebastian like a physical blow. Frank's expression softened even further. "That's a beautiful picture," he said. "I bet it will be even prettier when you finish it." "I have lots of time," the girl replied, already returning her attention to the page. After Frank moved on, Sebastian found himself moving closer to the executive suite under the pretense of cleaning nearby offices. From this vantage point, he could observe the girl more closely, and what he saw filled him with a mixture of admiration and heartbreak. She had developed her own little routine for the long wait. Color for a while, then play a quiet game with her elephant. Elaborate scenarios whispered so softly that Sebastian couldn't make out the words, but which seemed to involve the elephant having adventures in exotic locations. When she got restless, she would walk to the end of the hallway and back, always returning to her designated spot on the steps. Occasionally, she would stand and press her ear to her mother's office door, listening for signs that the meeting might be ending soon. When she heard voices or movement, her face would light up with hope, but as the sounds continued without the door opening, she would return to her waiting spot with practiced resignation. Around 10 o'clock, Sebastian witnessed something that made his chest tighten with recognition. The girl had been sitting quietly for almost an hour when she suddenly put down her crayons and pressed the heels of her palms against her eyes, small shoulders beginning to shake. She was trying not to cry, fighting against tears with the same determined silence Sebastian had seen in Emma during those first difficult months after Sarah's death. The similarity was so sharp it took his breath away. Here was another young one learning too early that patience was survival, that making noise or demanding attention might somehow make an already difficult situation worse. The girl had learned to carry her sadness alone, just as Emma had tried to do. Sebastian found himself walking toward her before he'd consciously decided to act. His feet carried him across the marble floor until he stood a respectful distance from the steps. "Hey there," he said softly. The girl looked up, startled, quickly wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Up close, Sebastian could see that her green eyes were indeed bright with tears, but also surprisingly alert and intelligent. She studied him carefully, taking in his janitor's uniform and the ID badge clipped to his shirt. "Are you the man who cleans the building?" she asked. "I am. My name is Sebastian. What's your name?" She hesitated, glancing toward her mother's office as if checking whether this conversation was permitted. "I'm Aria," she said finally. "Aria Corlez. It's nice to meet you, Aria. That's a pretty name." A small smile flickered across her face. "It means air or song. Mommy picked it because she said I was like music when I was born." Sebastian felt something warm and protective stir in his chest. "That's a beautiful reason to choose a name. And I can see you're a very good waiter. Most people your age would have a hard time being so patient." Aria straightened slightly, pride mixing with weariness in her expression. "I'm really good at waiting." Mommy says patience is one of the most important qualities a person can have, especially if you want to be successful like her. Your mommy is right that patience is important, Sebastian said carefully. But being patient and being lonely are two different things. Are you feeling lonely out here? The question seemed to surprise her, as if no adult had ever asked about her feelings regarding the long waits. She considered it seriously before answering. Sometimes, she admitted, but Elephant keeps me company. And sometimes I pretend I'm a princess waiting in her tower, and eventually someone brave will come to visit me. Sebastian knelt down to bring himself closer to her eye level, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Well, I'm probably not brave like a knight, but I do visit the 49th floor every night around this time. If it would make waiting less lonely, maybe I could say hello when I'm working up here. Arya's face brightened considerably. You would do that? You wouldn't be too busy? I'm never too busy to say hello to someone who's waiting patiently. Besides, I bet Elephant gets tired of being the only one to talk to. For the first time since Sebastian had seen her, Arya laughed, a sound like silver bells that made the sterile corporate hallway feel warmer. Elephant is a very good listener, but he's not much of a conversationalist. Sebastian smiled. Well, then maybe I can help fill in the gaps. I should probably get back to work now, but I'll see you tomorrow evening if you're here again. I probably will be, Arya said matter-of-factly. Mommy has meetings most nights this week. As Sebastian returned to his cleaning cart, he felt the weight of that simple statement. Most nights this week. This wasn't just a busy period for Vivian Corlay. This was apparently the normal rhythm of her life, with regular evening meetings. That stretched far into the night while her daughter waited patiently in hallways. The third evening confirmed Sebastian's worst suspicions about the pattern developing. When he reached the 49th floor, Arya was already there, settled into what was clearly her usual spot with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. Tonight, she'd brought a small blanket along with her other supplies, and she had arranged her space with the careful organization of a young person who understood that comfort had to be created rather than expected. Sebastian had spent the day thinking about their brief conversation, remembering the way her face had lit up when he'd offered to check on her during his rounds. Emma had looked at him with similar hope during those first weeks after Sarah died, when every small gesture of care felt like a lifeline in an ocean of uncertainty. "Good evening, Arya," he said as he approached with his cleaning cart. "Sebastian." Her face brightened immediately, and she scrambled to her feet. "You came back, just like you said you would." "Of course I did. A promise is a promise." Sebastian parked his cart nearby and took a closer look at her setup. Along with the blanket and her usual supplies, she'd added a small pillow and what appeared to be a homework folder. "I see you've made this spot pretty comfortable." "I've gotten good at it," Arya said with pride that broke Sebastian's heart. No young person should take pride in their ability to wait alone for hours, but he recognized the resilience that drove her to make the best of a difficult situation. "What are you working on tonight?" he asked, nodding toward the homework folder. "Math worksheets," she said, making a face that was universally recognizable as young person encountering arithmetic. "Mrs. Patterson says I'm really good at reading and writing, but numbers are trickier." Sebastian knelt down beside her, careful to maintain appropriate boundaries while showing interest in her schoolwork. "May I take a look? I used to help my daughter with her math homework." Arya's eyes widened. "You have a daughter? How old is she?" "She's 8. Her name is Emma, and she had trouble with math too when she was your age. Did you teach her tricks to make it easier?" Sebastian smiled, remembering the patient evenings he and Emma had spent at their kitchen table, working through addition and subtraction problems with the help of counting bears and colorful manipulatives. "A few. Would you like me to show you?" For the next 20 minutes, Sebastian found himself seated cross-legged on the marble floor next to Arya, helping her work through division problems by showing her how to think of them as stories about sharing. He used her crayons as visual aids, demonstrating how 24 crayons could be divided equally among 6 boxes, or how 18 crackers could be shared among 3 friends. Aria was a quick learner, her face lighting up each time a concept clicked into place. Sebastian found himself genuinely enjoying the teaching process, remembering how satisfying it was to watch understanding dawn in a young person's eyes. It reminded him of the best moments he'd shared with Emma, those times when he felt like he was successfully fulfilling both parental roles, despite his fears about being enough. "You're really good at explaining things," Aria said as she successfully completed a problem on her own. "Are you a teacher too?" "No, I'm just a janitor. But my wife used to be a teacher, and I learned some things from watching her work with students." "Used to be?" Aria asked with the straightforward curiosity that young people brought to adult complexities. Sebastian felt the familiar tightness in his throat that came with talking about Sarah. "She died a few years ago. Now it's just Emma and me." Aria studied his face with surprising maturity. "That must be very sad and very hard. It is sometimes. But Emma and I take care of each other, and that helps." Aria nodded thoughtfully. "I think taking care of people is one of the most important jobs anyone can have. Even more important than making money." The wisdom in her words, delivered with such simple certainty, hit Sebastian unexpectedly hard. Here was a 6-year-old who had clearly given serious thought to the relative value of different kinds of work. Probably because her own experience had taught her the difference between financial success and human care. "I think you're absolutely right about that," Sebastian said. "Taking care of people is the most important work there is." As they worked through more math problems, Sebastian learned more about Aria's daily life. She attended Millbrook Academy, a private school that cost more per year than Sebastian made, but she rode the school bus like any other young person because her mother's schedule was too unpredictable for regular pickup arrangements. She had a nanny named Mrs. Rodriguez, who picked her up from school and brought her to the office when Vivian's meetings were scheduled to run late. "Mrs. Rodriguez is really nice," Aria said as she carefully erased a mistake on her worksheet. "She makes good snacks and she knows lots of songs in Spanish. But she has to leave at 6 because she has her own family to take care of." "So after 6 you wait here by yourself?" Aria nodded matter-of-factly. "Mommy says it's safer for me to wait inside the building than to go home alone, and she's right here if I need anything urgent. She just can't be interrupted during meetings because they're too important." Sebastian tried to keep his expression neutral, but internally he was struggling with a mixture of anger and sympathy. He could understand Vivian's logic. The building was secure, she was technically nearby, and leaving a 6-year-old alone at home would be far worse. But there was something troubling about a system that regularly required a young person to spend hours waiting in empty hallways. "Do you ever get scared, waiting here alone?" Aria considered the question seriously. "Not scared, exactly. The building is very safe, and Frank checks on me, and now you visit too. But sometimes I get sad because it's very quiet, and I miss having people to talk to." The simple honesty of her answer made Sebastian's chest ache. "What do you do when you feel sad?" "Like that? I talk to Elephant, or I work on my coloring books, or I practice piano pieces in my head. And I remind myself that Mommy is working so hard because she loves me and wants to make sure we have everything we need." Sebastian recognized the careful way she recited those last words, as if they were an explanation she had heard many times and was trying hard to believe. It was the kind of justification adults gave young people when situations were too complicated for simple explanations, and the kind of explanation young people accepted because they had no other choice. "Your mommy does love you very much," Sebastian said gently. "Sometimes grown-ups have to work harder than they want to because that's what they think is best for their families." "I know," Aria said. "I just wish sometimes that she didn't have to work quite so much. Or that her meetings could happen during the day when I'm at school, so we could have dinner together more often." The wistfulness in her voice broke Sebastian's heart. He found himself thinking about his own evening routine with Emma, their simple dinners, homework time at the kitchen table, bedtime stories read in the glow of her nightlight. They might not have luxury, but they had each other's daily presence, and suddenly that seemed like wealth beyond measure. "Well," Sebastian said, checking his watch and realizing he'd spent far more time on the 49th floor than his schedule allowed, "I should probably get back to work. But I'm really glad I could help with your math homework." "Me too," Arya sighed, carefully organizing her supplies. "Will you visit again tomorrow if I'm here?" "Absolutely." "And Arya? If you ever need anything while you're waiting, if you get scared or worried or even just bored, you can always ask Frank to help you find me, okay? I'm usually somewhere in the building." Her smile was radiant. "Thank you, Sebastian. That makes me feel less alone." As Sebastian returned to his cleaning routine, he carried that smile with him through the rest of his shift. But he also carried a growing concern about what he was witnessing. Arya was clearly a resilient, intelligent young person who was making the best of a difficult situation. But the situation itself troubled him deeply. The fourth evening brought the revelation that changed everything. Sebastian thought he understood about Arya's situation. When he reached the 49th floor, he immediately noticed that something was different. Arya sat in her usual spot, but her careful composure had cracked. Her coloring book lay forgotten beside her, and she was crying with the quiet intensity of someone who had been holding back tears for too long. Sebastian abandoned his cleaning cart and approached her immediately. "Arya, what's wrong?" She looked up at him with eyes red from crying, her small face streaked with tears. "I made a mistake," she said in a voice thick with distress. "A really big mistake, and I don't know how to fix it." Sebastian knelt beside her, his mind racing through possibilities. Had she broken something valuable? Gotten in trouble at school? Hurt herself somehow? "Tell me what happened," he said gently. "Maybe we can figure out how to make it better." Arya wiped her nose with a tissue from the small pack she kept in her backpack. "Today at school, Mrs. Patterson asked us to write about what makes our family special. Everyone wrote about family dinners and weekend trips and game nights and things like that." Sebastian waited patiently as she gathered herself to continue. "And I wanted to write about those things too, but I couldn't because we don't really do them. So I wrote about how my mommy is really smart and successful and important, and how she works hard to take care of us." "That sounds like a lovely thing to write about," Sebastian said, still not understanding where the crisis lay. "But then Mrs. Patterson asked me to read it out loud to the class, and when I did, Tommy Martinez raised his hand and asked why I didn't write about fun things we do together. And I tried to think of something, but I couldn't, and everyone was looking at me, and I just started crying right there in front of everyone." Sebastian's heart clenched. He could picture the scene, a room full of 6-year-olds, sharing stories of family adventures while Arya struggled to find similar experiences in her own life. And then Mrs. Patterson asked if everything was okay at home, and I said yes, because it is, because Mommy takes really good care of me, and I have everything I need. But she looked worried, and she asked if there was a grown-up at home who could help me with homework and make sure I eat dinner on time and tuck me in at bedtime. Arya's tears were flowing harder now. And I told her about Mrs. Rodriguez, but then she asked about nighttime and weekends, and I had to tell her that sometimes I'm by myself for a while, when Mrs. Rodriguez goes home and Mommy has to work late. Sebastian felt a cold understanding beginning to settle in his stomach. What did Mrs. Patterson say to that? She said she was going to call Mommy to have a conversation about making sure I have proper supervision. And I think I got Mommy in trouble. And now maybe social services will come and decide that Mommy isn't taking good enough care of me, and they might take me away to live with strangers. The words tumbled out in a rush of panic and guilt. Sebastian realized that this young person had been carrying an enormous burden, not just the loneliness of waiting in empty hallways, but the fear that if she complained or if anyone discovered the true extent of her situation, she might lose the only family she had. "Aria," Sebastian said carefully, "how long has it been since you and your mommy had dinner together?" She considered the question seriously, her tears gradually subsiding as she focused on trying to remember. "I think it was last Sunday, or maybe the Sunday before that. She tried to come home early on Tuesday, but then she got a really important phone call and had to come back to the office." "And how often do you spend evenings here, waiting for her meetings to finish?" "Most school nights. And sometimes on weekends too, if she has to work with people in other countries who are awake when we're supposed to be sleeping." Sebastian felt his anger rising, not at Aria, but at the situation that had placed such impossible demands on both mother and daughter. Vivian Corlay was clearly a woman under enormous professional pressure, but the cost was being paid by her 6-year-old daughter, who had learned to measure her worth by how patiently she could wait and how little trouble she could cause. "Aria, listen to me very carefully," Sebastian said, moving closer and speaking in his most reassuring tone. "You did not get your mommy in trouble. Teachers ask questions like that because their job is to make sure all their students are safe and happy. Mrs. Patterson is worried about you because she cares about you, not because you did anything wrong. But what if social services decides mommy isn't a good mommy? What if they take me away?" Sebastian's heart broke at the terror in her voice. "Honey, your mommy loves you very much. Anyone can see that. Sometimes grown-ups just need help figuring out how to balance all their responsibilities. That doesn't mean anyone is going to take you away from her. Are you sure?" Aria asked, looking at him with desperate hope. Sebastian wasn't sure at all. He had no idea what protocols might be triggered by a teacher's report of a young person being left unsupervised for hours at a time. But he could see that Aria needed reassurance more than absolute honesty in that moment. "What I'm sure of is that there are people who want to help your family figure out better ways to manage your mommy's work schedule. Sometimes families just need to make adjustments so that everyone's needs get met." As they talked, Sebastian began to understand the full scope of what he had been witnessing over the past few evenings. Aria wasn't just occasionally waiting for her mother. She was essentially raising herself during the hours when Mrs. Rodriguez wasn't available. She made her own snacks from whatever was in the office kitchenette, completed homework without adult guidance, and put herself to bed in the small adjoining room that Vivian had set up for exactly this purpose. "Does your mommy know how sad you sometimes feel when you're waiting alone?" Sebastian asked. Aria shook her head. "I don't want to make her feel bad. She already works so hard, and she tells me all the time how proud she is that I'm such a good, patient little girl. If I told her I was sad, she might think she was failing at being a mommy, and that would make her even more stressed." The maturity and consideration in her response left Sebastian speechless. This 6-year-old had taken on the emotional burden of protecting her mother from the consequences of their family's dysfunction, sacrificing her own needs to preserve her mother's sense of competence. At that moment, as if summoned by their conversation, the door to Vivian Corlay's office opened. Sebastian looked up to see a woman in her mid-30s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. Even from a distance, he could see the family resemblance. Aria had inherited her mother's striking green eyes and delicate bone structure. Vivian stepped into the hallway, followed by 2 men in expensive suits who were still talking rapidly about market projections and investment strategies. She nodded politely at their continued conversation, while simultaneously checking her phone and glancing toward where Aria sat. "Aria, darling, gather your things," she called out, her voice carrying the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to managing multiple priorities simultaneously. "We'll need to stop by the office on 12 to pick up some documents, and then we can head home." Sebastian watched as Aria immediately began packing her supplies with practiced speed. transforming herself from a crying, vulnerable young person into the patient, competent daughter her mother expected her to be. The change was so swift and complete that Sebastian wondered if he had imagined the emotional crisis of just moments before. But as Arya stood and shouldered her backpack, she looked back at Sebastian with an expression that held both gratitude and a plea for continued friendship. "Thank you for helping me with my math homework," she said formally, as if establishing for her mother that their interaction had been appropriate and beneficial. "You're very welcome," Sebastian replied, understanding that he was being introduced into their family dynamic in a way that required careful navigation. Vivian Corley looked at him then, really seeing him for the first time. Her gaze was sharp and assessing, taking in his janitor's uniform, his respectful distance from her daughter, and the scattered evidence of the homework session that had just concluded. "I'm Vivian Corley," she said, extending her hand with the automatic politeness of someone accustomed to managing business relationships. "I don't believe we've met." "Sebastian Renlo," he replied, accepting her handshake and noting the firmness of her grip. "I'm part of the evening cleaning crew." "Mr. Renlo was helping me understand the vision," Arya interjected, her voice bright with genuine enthusiasm. "He made it much easier than it seemed in class." Vivian's expression softened slightly as she looked down at her daughter. "That was very kind of him. Did you finish all your homework?" "Yes, Mommy, everything except the reading, and I can do that at home." "Excellent." Vivian looked back at Sebastian, and he caught a glimpse of something vulnerable in her eyes, a mother's gratitude, mixed with what might have been embarrassment about the circumstances of their meeting. "Thank you for taking the time to help her. That was very thoughtful." "She's a pleasure to work with," Sebastian said honestly, "very bright and determined." As the small family prepared to leave, Sebastian found himself looking at them with new understanding. Vivian Corley wasn't a neglectful mother. She was a woman trying to balance impossible demands while maintaining a successful business that probably employed hundreds of people. And Arya wasn't just a lonely daughter. She was a young person, learning to be resilient in circumstances that no young person should have to navigate alone, but understanding the complexity of their situation didn't make it any less troubling. As Sebastian watched them walk toward the elevator, Vivian checking her phone one more time while Arya clutched her elephant and backpack, he realized that he had become invested in their story in a way that went beyond casual concern. Something needed to change in their dynamic, but Sebastian wasn't sure what role, if any, he could appropriately play in that transformation. What he did know was that he couldn't simply return to his routine and pretend he hadn't witnessed Arya's tears and fears, or the weight of loneliness that she carried with such determined grace. As the elevator doors closed behind them, Sebastian stood alone in the hallway, surrounded by the scent of floor cleaner and the quiet hum of building systems, knowing that tomorrow evening would bring new challenges in a story that had become more complicated and important than anything he had expected to encounter while simply doing his job. Sebastian barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Arya's tear-streaked face and heard her worried voice asking if social services would take her away from her mother. By 4 a.m, he had given up on rest and instead sat at his small kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring out the window at the pre-dawn darkness and trying to figure out what, if anything, he could or should do about the situation he had witnessed. The rational part of his mind insisted that he should stay out of it. Vivian Corley was one of the most powerful people in the city, perfectly capable of managing her own family affairs. Arya was fed, clothed, housed in luxury, and receiving an expensive private education. Many people would argue that a few hours of waiting in a secure building was a small price to pay for the privileges that came with being the daughter of a billionaire. But the parental part of his mind, the part that had been shaped by 3 years of single parenthood and the memory of Emma's own struggles with loss and adaptation, couldn't let go of what he had seen in Arya's eyes. Beneath the careful politeness and practiced patience, there was a loneliness that reminded him too much of his own daughter's darkest moments. When Emma shuffled into the kitchen at 6:30, still in her pajamas and with her hair sticking up at impossible angles, Sebastian was still sitting in the same spot with his now cold coffee. "Daddy, why are you awake so early?" she asked, climbing into the chair across from him and rubbing sleep from her eyes. Sebastian looked at his daughter's sleepy face and felt a surge of gratitude for their simple morning routine. Whatever challenges they faced financially, Emma never had to wonder whether she was wanted or whether her needs mattered to the adult responsible for her care. "I was just thinking about work," he said, which was technically true. Emma studied his face with the perceptiveness that continued to surprise him. At 8 years old, she had developed an uncanny ability to read his moods and concerns, probably because it had been just the two of them for so long. "Are you worried about something?" Sebastian considered how much to share. Emma was wise beyond her years, but she was still a young person who shouldn't be burdened with adult complexities. On the other hand, he had always tried to be honest with her about the important things, and this situation was beginning to feel very important indeed. "There's a little girl who comes to the building where I work," he said carefully. "She has to wait by herself for a long time while her mommy finishes working, and I think she gets lonely and scared sometimes." Emma's expression grew serious. "That sounds sad. Why doesn't her mommy finish work earlier?" "Her mommy has a very important job that sometimes keeps her busy late into the evening. It's complicated." "Like when you have to work on weekends sometimes?" "Sort of, but more often. This little girl waits almost every night." Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Then she asked, "Does she have anyone to talk to while she waits?" "Just me sometimes when I'm cleaning nearby. And the security guard checks on her." "That's not very much company for a little girl," Emma said with the straightforward wisdom that young people brought to human relationships. "Is her daddy around to help?" Sebastian realized he didn't know the answer to that question. In all his conversations with Aria, she had never mentioned her father, and Vivian wore no wedding ring. The family dynamic he had observed suggested that Vivian was managing parenthood alone, just as he was. "I don't think so," he said. Emma nodded solemnly. "Then her mommy is probably doing the best she can, like you do for me. But maybe she needs help figuring out how to do it better." The simple clarity of his daughter's assessment hit Sebastian with unexpected force. Emma had identified the core issue. Vivian wasn't neglectful or uncaring. She was overwhelmed and possibly lacking in resources or support systems that could help her balance the demands of single parenthood with the requirements of running a major corporation. "You're right," Sebastian said, feeling something shift in his chest from concern to determination. "Maybe she does need help." That day, instead of trying to catch up on sleep as he usually did, Sebastian found himself researching. He used his public library card to access the internet and began learning about resources available to working parents in Millbrook. What he discovered both surprised and encouraged him. The city had several programs designed to support families where work demands created childcare challenges. There was an after-school program that stayed open until 8 p.m., specifically designed for the children of professionals who worked long hours. There were also licensed childcare providers who specialized in flexible evening care for families with non-traditional schedules. More importantly, Sebastian learned about the Millbrook Family Resource Center, a non-profit organization that helped connect families with appropriate services and support systems. They offered everything from childcare referrals to family counseling to practical assistance with time management and work-life balance. The problem, Sebastian realized, wasn't that solutions didn't exist. The problem was that Vivian might not know about them or might not have had time to research alternatives to her current arrangement. When you were working 14-hour days and managing the pressures of a major corporation, finding time to investigate better childcare options probably felt impossible. By the time Sebastian arrived at work that evening, he had made a decision. He was going to approach Vivian Corlay directly and offer to share the information he had gathered. It was presumptuous, and she might well tell him to mind his own business, but he couldn't continue to watch Aria's lonely vigils without at least trying to help Dot as he prepared his cleaning cart. Sebastian rehearsed what he might say. He needed to be respectful of the boundaries between them. He was an employee of the building, not a family friend or counselor. But he also needed to find a way to convey that his concern came from a place of genuine caring, not judgment or interference. When he reached the 49th floor, Aria was in her usual spot, but tonight she looked different. Her careful composure seemed more fragile than usual, and Sebastian could see that she had been crying again, though she had clearly made an effort to clean herself up before anyone might notice. "Hello, Aria," he said gently, approaching with his cart, but not immediately beginning his cleaning routine. "Hi, Sebastian," she replied, but her voice lacked its usual brightness. "How did things go at school today? Did Mrs. Patterson say anything more about your essay?" Aria's face crumpled slightly. "She asked me to stay after class, and she wanted to know more about what I do in the evenings and on weekends. I tried to explain that Mommy works really hard, and that I'm okay waiting here, but she looked more worried after I talked to her." Sebastian knelt beside her, recognizing the weight of anxiety that was pressing down on this young person's shoulders. "What exactly did you tell her?" "I told her about how I do my homework here, and how Frank checks on me, and how you help me with math sometimes. I thought that would make her feel better because it shows that people care about me. But instead, she asked more questions about how often this happens, and whether I ever feel scared or sad." "And what did you say to that?" Aria looked down at her hands, which were twisted together in her lap. "I told her the truth. That I do feel sad sometimes, but that I understand why Mommy has to work so much. And that I try to be brave because crying doesn't help anything." Sebastian felt his heart break a little more. "Aria, there's nothing wrong with feeling sad when you're lonely. That's a normal human feeling, and you don't have to hide it to protect the adults around you. But if I tell people I'm sad, they might think Mommy is doing something wrong. And she's not. She loves me so much, and she's trying so hard to take care of both her business and me. I don't want to get her in trouble just because I'm not brave enough to handle waiting alone." The guilt and self-blame in her voice made Sebastian realize how heavy a burden this young person had been carrying. She had somehow concluded that her natural need for companionship and security was a character flaw that could endanger her mother's reputation and their family stability. "Listen to me carefully," Sebastian said, moving closer and speaking with gentle intensity. "You are one of the bravest people I have ever met. The fact that you feel sad sometimes doesn't mean you're not brave. It means you're human. And the fact that you love your Mommy and want to protect her shows what a caring person you are. But you deserve to have adults who protect you too." "I know Mommy would spend more time with me if she could," Aria said earnestly. "She tells me all the time how much she wishes her work wasn't so demanding. But she has hundreds of people who depend on her business for their jobs, and she can't let them down." Sebastian recognized the sophisticated reasoning that Vivian had obviously shared with her daughter. It was all true. Vivian did have enormous responsibilities that affected many lives. But there was something troubling about a 6-year-old being asked to understand and accept such complex adult priorities. "Your Mommy is right that her work is important," Sebastian said carefully, "but taking care of you is important too. And maybe there are ways to do both things better, if she had someone to help her think through the options." "What do you mean?" Sebastian took a breath, knowing that what he was about to suggest might be overstepping boundaries, but unable to stop himself from trying. "Well, there are programs and services in the city that are designed to help working parents manage situations exactly like yours. Your Mommy might not know about them because she's been so busy, but they exist specifically to help families figure out better solutions. Arya's eyes widened with something that might have been hope. Really? What kind of programs? There are after-school programs that stay open until 8 o'clock, so kids can do homework and play with other kids instead of waiting alone. There are also babysitters who specialize in taking care of young people during evening hours when parents have to work late. And there are people whose job it is to help families find the right resources for their specific situation. Do you think Mommy would be interested in hearing about things like that? Sebastian was quiet for a moment, considering how to answer. I think your mommy loves you very much and wants you to be happy. If she knew how sad you feel sometimes during these long waits, and if she knew there were other options available, she would probably want to learn about them. But I don't want to tell her I'm sad because that would make her feel bad. What if someone else told her about the options without mentioning that you were sad? What if someone just shared information about resources that might be helpful? For busy families? Arya tilted her head, considering this possibility. Would you do that? The question hung in the air between them. Sebastian realized that he had just volunteered for something that could have serious consequences for his job, his relationship with building management, and his ability to continue helping Arya. But looking at her hopeful face, he found himself unable to back down. If you think it would be okay, and if the opportunity presents itself naturally, yes, I would be willing to share information about family resources with your mommy. I think that would be really nice, Arya said, and for the first time in days, her smile looked genuine. At that moment, Frank appeared on his evening patrol. He approached them with the measured friendliness that Sebastian had come to appreciate about the older man. Evening, folks. How's the homework situation tonight, young lady? Much better, thanks to Sebastian's help with math yesterday, Arya replied politely. Frank looked at Sebastian with an expression that conveyed both appreciation and concern. Might I have a word with you, Sebastian? Just around the corner there. Sebastian felt his stomach tighten, wondering if his interactions with Arya had somehow crossed a line he hadn't been aware of. But he nodded and followed Frank a few steps away from where Arya sat. I hope I haven't been doing anything inappropriate, Sebastian said quietly. Frank shook his head. No, nothing like that. If anything, I'm grateful that someone with your obvious care and good sense has been looking out for her. But I wanted you to know that building management received a call from Millbrook Academy today. Sebastian's blood ran cold. What kind of call? The young lady's teacher expressed some concerns about her home situation. Nothing accusatory, you understand, but they're required to follow up when a student indicates they might be spending significant time unsupervised. There's going to be a meeting tomorrow between the school administration and Ms. Corley. How did you find out about this? Building security gets notified when there are going to be meetings with outside agencies or professionals who might need to verify building access and safety protocols. It's standard procedure, but it means this situation is about to get a lot more formal attention. Sebastian felt the weight of everything he had learned settling on his shoulders. Tomorrow, Vivian would be called to account for her daughter's care arrangements in a way that could have serious implications for their family. And Arya would probably blame herself for triggering the scrutiny. Frank, in your opinion, is there anything genuinely unsafe about the current arrangement? Frank considered the question seriously. The building is secure. The young lady is never truly alone since you and I are both here, and she's obviously well cared for in general. But spending hours alone in office hallways isn't ideal for a 6-year-old, even in the best circumstances. And if it's happening regularly, it suggests that the family might benefit from some additional support systems. That's exactly what I've been thinking, Sebastian said. I've actually been researching resources that might help, but I wasn't sure how to approach Ms. Corley about it. Frank raised an eyebrow. You've been researching family resources? My daughter Emma made me realize that sometimes parents just need help finding better solutions, not criticism for the solutions they're currently using. Smart daughter you've got there. And you're right. From what I've observed, Miss Corley isn't neglectful, she's overwhelmed. Big difference. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both looking toward where Arya sat with her coloring book and homework, unaware of the adult conversation that was shaping her immediate future. Sebastian, Frank said finally, if you've got information that might help this family, tomorrow's meeting might be the right time to share it. Not as interference, but as someone who's been in a position to observe the situation and who's taken the time to research constructive alternatives. Sebastian looked at him in surprise. You think I should approach Miss Corley directly? I think that young lady needs advocates, and you've already shown yourself to be someone who cares about her well-being without judgment of her mother's choices. Sometimes the best help comes from the most unexpected sources. The next evening, Sebastian arrived at work carrying a manila folder containing printed pages from the Millbrook Family Resource Center website, information about after-school programs, and contact details for several childcare services that specialized in flexible evening care. He had spent his day off organizing the materials in a way that would be informative without seeming presumptuous, though he still wasn't entirely sure he would have the courage to actually present them to Vivian Corley, as he prepared his cleaning cart. His hands shook slightly with nervous energy. Frank had mentioned that the meeting with school administrators was scheduled for 5 o'clock, which meant it would likely be concluding around the time Sebastian reached the upper floors. He had no idea what the outcome of that meeting would be, or what mood Vivian would be in when he encountered her. More importantly, he didn't know how Arya was handling what was probably a very stressful day for her. Sebastian had thought about her throughout his day off, wondering if she was blaming herself for the school's concerns and worrying about what changes might be forced upon their family routine. When Sebastian reached the 49th floor at 8:30, he immediately noticed that the atmosphere was different. Vivian's office door was open, spilling warm light into the hallway, and he could hear voices engaged in conversation rather than the usual silence of after-hours meetings. Arya sat in her customary spot, but instead of being alone with her homework and her elephant, she was surrounded by several adults. Sebastian recognized Frank, who was apparently off his regular patrol schedule, and a woman in her 50s wearing a professional blazer and carrying a clipboard. Sitting cross-legged on the floor beside Arya was another woman, younger, with kind eyes and an easy smile, who seemed to be helping with a coloring book. As Sebastian approached with his cart, trying to understand what he was witnessing, Vivian emerged from her office, looking more relaxed than he had ever seen her. Her suit jacket was off, her hair was pulled back more casually, and when she saw him, her face brightened with recognition. "Sebastian," she said, walking toward him with extended hand. "I was hoping you would be working tonight. I wanted to thank you properly for the kindness you've shown Arya over the past week." "It was my pleasure," Sebastian replied, accepting her handshake while trying to read the dynamics of the scene around Arya. "I understand from Arya that you've been helping her with homework and providing companionship during her waits here. That means more to me than I can adequately express." Sebastian glanced toward Arya, who was watching their conversation with bright, curious eyes. "She's a wonderful young person. Very bright and very resilient." "She is indeed," Vivian agreed. "And today's meeting with her school helped me realize that her resilience has been masking some needs that I haven't been addressing as well as I thought I was." The woman with the clipboard approached them, extending her hand to Sebastian. "I'm Dr. Carolyn Martinez from Millbrook Academy. Are you the building maintenance worker who's been interacting with Arya?" Sebastian felt a moment of panic, wondering if he was about to be criticized or questioned about the appropriateness of his interactions with Arya. "I'm Sebastian Renlow. I work the evening cleaning shift, and yes, I've spoken with Arya on several occasions when I've been cleaning this floor." "Arya speaks very highly of you," Dr. Martinez said warmly. She told us how patient and helpful you've been, especially with her mathematics homework. It's clear that your presence has made her evening waits much less isolating. I have a daughter of my own, Sebastian said. I understand how important it is for young people to feel seen and cared for. Which brings me to something I wanted to discuss with you, Vivian interjected. Today's meeting was quite eye-opening for me. I've been so focused on maintaining Aria's routine and ensuring her basic needs were met that I hadn't fully considered the emotional impact of the amount of time she spends waiting alone. Sebastian looked toward Aria again, relieved to see that she was engaged in animated conversation with the younger woman and didn't appear distressed by the adult discussion happening around her. The school brought in Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Vivian continued, gesturing toward the woman sitting with Aria, who's a family resource coordinator with the city. She's been explaining options I wasn't aware existed for families in situations like ours. Dr. Walsh looked up from her conversation with Aria and joined their group. Are you the Sebastian that Aria keeps mentioning? She says you're the person who makes waiting here feel less scary and more like having a friend nearby. Sebastian felt his cheeks warm. I just tried to be available if she needed adult conversation or help with schoolwork. What you provided was exactly what she needed most. Consistent, reliable, caring adult presence, Dr. Walsh said. Which is why I'm hoping you might be interested in something we'd like to propose. Sebastian looked between the adults, uncertain. What kind of proposal could involve him in their family situation? Vivian stepped forward slightly. Sebastian, I've learned today that there are several after-school programs and evening childcare options that would be much more appropriate for Aria than having her wait in office hallways. Dr. Walsh has connected us with the Millbrook Children's evening program, which offers homework assistance, recreational activities, and dinner for young people whose parents work non-traditional schedules. That sounds wonderful, Sebastian said, though he felt a surprising pang of sadness at the thought of not seeing Aria during his evening rounds. It is wonderful, Vivian agreed. But the program has a waiting list, and there are still going to be occasions when my work schedule requires flexibility that even the best childcare programs can't accommodate. Which is where our proposal comes in. Dr. Walsh smiled encouragingly. We understand that you're a single parent yourself, Sebastian, with an 8-year-old daughter. We're wondering if you might be interested in providing occasional evening childcare for Aria in your own home when Vivian's schedule requires it. Sebastian stared at them, trying to process what he was hearing. You want me to babysit Aria? We want to offer you a part-time position as Aria's evening caregiver, Vivian clarified. It would be official, with proper compensation and clear boundaries. On nights when my meetings run particularly late, or when the evening program isn't available, Aria could stay with you and Emma. She could do homework, have dinner, and have the kind of normal family evening that she's been missing. Your background check came back clean, Frank added with a grin. Building security already had your information on file, so Dr. Walsh was able to expedite the screening process. Sebastian felt overwhelmed by the proposal. You did a background check on me? Standard procedure when considering someone for a childcare position, Dr. Walsh explained. But more importantly, Aria specifically requested that we explore whether you might be willing to help in this way. She said that being around you made her feel safe and happy, and that she would love to meet Emma and see what a normal family evening looks like. Sebastian looked toward Aria, who had been listening to their conversation while pretending to color. When she realized he was looking at her, she smiled hopefully. Would you like that, Aria? He asked. Would you like to come have dinner with Emma and me sometimes when your mommy has to work late? More than anything, Aria said, her voice bright with genuine excitement. I've been wanting to meet Emma ever since you told me about her. And I would love to see what it's like to eat dinner at a kitchen table with a family. The simple honesty of her desire hit Sebastian in the chest. Here was a young person who had everything money could buy, but who was longing for the kind of basic family experiences he took for granted with Emma. There would be practical benefits for your family as well, Vivian added. The compensation would be significantly more than you earn from your current evening shift, and the schedule would be more flexible, allowing you to spend more time with Emma during the day. Sebastian tried to think through the implications. More money would mean better opportunities for Emma, music lessons, art supplies, maybe even the possibility of setting aside savings for her future education. More daytime hours would mean he could attend school events he currently missed because of his work schedule. But more than the practical benefits, Sebastian found himself genuinely excited about the possibility of providing Aria with the kind of consistent, nurturing family environment she had been craving. Emma would love having a companion for homework and dinner, and Sebastian suspected that caring for Aria would help fill some of the emptiness in their own family dynamic. I would need to discuss it with Emma, Sebastian said slowly. This decision affects her too, and I want to make sure she's comfortable with the arrangement. Of course, Vivian said. Take whatever time you need to think it over and talk. With Emma, Dr. Walsh can provide you with all the details about compensation, scheduling, and expectations. In the meantime, Dr. Walsh added, Aria will be starting in the evening program next Monday, which should significantly reduce the number of occasions when alternative care would be needed. This would probably only be 1 or 2 evenings per week, and mainly during particularly busy periods in Vivian's work schedule. Sebastian looked around at the group of adults who had somehow assembled to solve Aria's childcare challenges, and realized that what he was witnessing was exactly what Emma had suggested days earlier: adults working together to help a mother figure out how to balance her responsibilities better. Can I ask how all of this came together so quickly? He said. Dr. Martinez smiled. Sometimes it just takes the right conversation to catalyze solutions that were already waiting to emerge. Aria's teacher brought concerns to our attention, which led to today's meeting with Vivian. Dr. Walsh was able to connect us with existing resources and programs. Frank provided information about building security, protocols, and your interactions with Aria, and you had already established yourself as someone who cared about Aria's well-being without judgment of her family situation. It was like putting together puzzle pieces that were already on the table, Dr. Walsh added. Everyone involved wanted what was best for Aria, and once we started communicating, the solutions became clear. As the adults continued discussing practical details, scheduling, emergency contacts, pick-up and drop-off logistics, Sebastian found his attention drifting to Aria. She was still coloring, but he could see the difference in her posture and expression. The careful wariness he had grown accustomed to seeing in her face had been replaced by something that looked like hope and anticipation. Sebastian, she said, looking up from her coloring book, if this works out, and if Emma is okay with it, could you teach me how to make those animal pancakes you told me about? The ones that look like elephants and butterflies? Sebastian grinned, feeling his heart expand with affection for this remarkable young person. Absolutely. Emma is an expert on animal pancakes. She could probably teach you techniques I haven't even thought of. And could we maybe work on math homework together at your kitchen table instead of on these marble steps? Every single time. Sebastian promised. As the evening wound down and the various adults prepared to leave, Sebastian realized that he was witnessing something extraordinary. A week ago, he had been a solitary janitor following a routine that barely intersected with the lives of the people whose spaces he cleaned. Tonight, he was being invited into a complex family situation as someone whose care and perspective were valued and needed. More importantly, Aria was transitioning from a young person who waited alone in hallways to someone who was surrounded by adults committed to ensuring her needs were met in developmentally appropriate ways. The transformation wasn't complete yet, but the momentum was unmistakable. 3 weeks later, Sebastian stood in his small kitchen, watching Emma teach Aria how to flip pancakes without splattering batter on the stovetop. It was their third evening together since the new arrangement had begun, and the girls had developed an easy friendship that filled the apartment with laughter and chatter Sebastian hadn't realized he'd been missing. The secret is in the wrist. Action, Emma explained seriously, demonstrating the proper flipping technique with a spatial awareness that reminded Sebastian how much she had matured over the past year. You have to be confident but not too aggressive, or the pancake goes flying. Arya nodded with the intense concentration she brought to everything, her tongue poking out slightly as she focused on the task. When her pancake landed successfully, back in the pan, both girls cheered as if she had just performed a circus act. I did it. Sebastian, did you see? I made a perfect elephant pancake. Sebastian looked over from where he was preparing their simple salad and confirmed that the pancake did indeed bear a reasonable resemblance to an elephant, complete with 2 round ears and what might generously be called a trunk. That's definitely going to be delicious, he said, and meant it. The evening routine they had established felt natural in a way that continued to surprise Sebastian. Arya would arrive around 5:30, usually delivered by Mrs. Rodriguez, who had become part of the extended support network that now surrounded the Corley family. The girls would work on homework together at Sebastian's small kitchen table while he prepared a simple dinner, nothing fancy, but always nutritious and made with care. After dinner, they would clean up together, each girl having been assigned specific responsibilities that made them feel important and included. Then there would be time for games, reading, or art projects before Arya's 7:30 bedtime, on the air mattress they had set up in Emma's room. What struck Sebastian most profoundly was how much joy Arya found in their simple routines. She delighted in setting the table and helping choose what vegetables to include in their salad, in the bedtime story ritual that Emma had insisted on sharing with her. These ordinary moments that Sebastian had taken for granted were, for Arya, experiences of family life she had been longing for. Sebastian, Arya said as she carefully transferred her elephant pancake to a plate, do you think my mommy would like to learn how to make these? It was a question Arya asked in various forms nearly every evening, wondering if her mother would enjoy the activities they shared, hoping to find ways to bridge the gap between her experiences in Sebastian's home and her relationship with Vivian. Sebastian had learned to navigate these questions carefully, supporting Arya's desire for connection with her mother while not criticizing Vivian's demanding schedule. I think your mommy would love to learn anything that makes you happy, he said. Maybe sometime when she has a free weekend morning, we could invite her over for pancake lessons. Arya's face lit up with the possibility. Do you think she would come? Do you think she would want to spend time in a regular apartment instead of fancy places? Emma, who had developed strong opinions about adult priorities over the past few weeks, chimed in. Moms like to be wherever their kids are happy. Trust me on this. Sebastian felt a familiar tightness in his throat at Emma's matter-of-fact wisdom. His daughter had embraced Arya's presence in their lives with a generosity that humbled him, sharing her space, her routines, and her father without apparent jealousy or resentment. If anything, Emma seemed to thrive on having someone to guide and care for, stepping into an older sibling role that brought out her most nurturing instincts. The transformation in both girls over the past 3 weeks had been remarkable. Emma had become more confident and responsible, taking pride in showing Arya how their household routines worked and helping her navigate everything from homework struggles to bedtime fears. Arya had gradually relaxed from her careful politeness into something that looked much more like normal young person behavior. She complained when vegetables were overcooked, got silly during bath time, and occasionally needed reminding about indoor voices and table manners. More importantly, the dark circles under Arya's eyes had faded, replaced by the bright alertness of someone who was sleeping well and feeling secure. She no longer flinched when doors closed loudly or when Sebastian moved too quickly around the kitchen. The hypervigilance that had characterized her behavior in the corporate, Building hallways had given way to the kind of comfortable distraction that suggested she felt truly safe. The arrangement was working well for Sebastian too, in ways he hadn't fully anticipated. The compensation Vivian provided was generous enough that he had been able to reduce his cleaning shifts to part-time, giving him more flexibility to attend Emma's school events and to be available during the day when she was sick or had early dismissals. More than that, caring for Arya had reminded him how much he enjoyed the daily interactions of family life, the homework assistance, the meal preparation, the bedtime stories that had become such a cherished part of their evening routine. "Girls," Sebastian said as they finished their pancakes, "I have some news to share with you." Both Arya and Emma looked at him with the focused attention that important announcements always commanded. "I spoke with your mommy today, Arya, and she asked if you might be interested in having a sleepover here this Saturday night. She has a conference call with colleagues in Tokyo that's scheduled to go very late, and she thought you might prefer to spend the night here rather than waiting in her office." Arya's eyes widened. "A whole sleepover? Like, I would sleep here and wake up here and have breakfast with you and Emma?" "That's exactly what it would mean," Sebastian confirmed. Arya looked at Emma, seeking confirmation that this plan was acceptable to her. Emma grinned and nodded enthusiastically. "We could stay up later than usual and watch a movie," Emma suggested. "And in the morning, we could make those special weekend pancakes with chocolate chips. And maybe," Sebastian added, "your mommy could join us for breakfast on Sunday morning when her call is finished. If she's not too tired, and if she'd like to see what our weekend morning routine looks like." The possibility of including Vivian in their family activities was something Sebastian had been considering for several days. He had noticed that Arya's questions about her mother's potential interest in their routines were becoming more frequent and more wistful, suggesting that the success of the evening arrangement was making her more aware of what was missing from her relationship with Vivian rather than less. "Do you really think she would want to?" Arya asked, hope and uncertainty warring in her voice. "I think she would love to spend relaxed time with you without the pressure of work schedules and meetings," Sebastian said honestly. "Sometimes adults need permission to slow down and enjoy simple things, just like young people do." That evening, as Sebastian tucked both girls into Emma's room, Arya curled up on her air mattress with her elephant, Emma surrounded by her usual collection of stuffed animals and chapter books. He reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in just a few short weeks. A month ago, his evenings had been solitary affairs spent pushing mop buckets through empty office buildings, his main human interactions limited to brief exchanges with security guards and the occasional late-working executive. Now his evenings were filled with conversation and laughter, homework assistance, and cooking projects. The comfortable chaos of two young people who felt safe enough to be themselves in his presence. "Sebastian," Arya said sleepily from her mattress, "thank you for letting me be part of your family." "Thank you for being part of our family," Sebastian replied, meaning it completely. As he turned off the light and headed toward the living room, Sebastian heard Emma's whispered voice. "Arya, do you think your mom gets lonely in that big office by herself?" "Probably," Arya whispered back. "But I think maybe she's getting less lonely now that she knows I'm not lonely anymore." Sebastian paused in the hallway, struck by the wisdom in that exchange. The success of their arrangement wasn't just measured by Arya's improved well-being, or by the financial stability it had brought to his own family. It was also creating space for Vivian to be a more present mother by removing the constant worry about Arya's emotional state during long work hours. Later that night, after both girls were deeply asleep, Sebastian received a text message from Vivian. "Thank you for giving Arya the kind of evening she wrote about in tonight's journal entry." She described making pancakes and feeling like a regular kid in a regular family where everyone takes care of each other. "That's a gift I couldn't give her on my own, and I'm more grateful than I know how to express." Sebastian read the message. twice, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with the paycheck he received for his care of Arya. This was the kind of work that aligned with his deepest values, creating safety and stability for young people, supporting families in crisis, using his own experience of single parenthood to help others navigate similar challenges. As he prepared for bed in his small apartment, listening to the quiet sounds of two young people sleeping peacefully nearby, Sebastian realized that what had begun as a simple act of kindness toward a lonely stranger had evolved into something that felt like purpose. He wasn't just earning money or filling time. He was contributing to the healing of a family and the building of community connections that benefited everyone involved. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and opportunities. But tonight, Sebastian fell asleep knowing that somewhere in the city, Vivian Corley was working late with the peace of mind that came from knowing her daughter was safe, loved, and surrounded by people who understood that caring for young people was both a privilege and a responsibility that extended far beyond biological relationships. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of golden sunlight that made Sebastian's small apartment feel warm and welcoming despite its modest furnishings. He woke to the sound of quiet giggling from Emma's room, where both girls were apparently already awake and planning some sort of elaborate breakfast surprise. The sleepover had been even more successful than Sebastian had hoped. Both girls had stayed up later than usual, watching a movie about a young girl who befriends a lonely dragon, and their whispered conversations had continued well past their official bedtime. But instead of being cranky from insufficient sleep, they seemed energized by the novelty of their shared morning routine. "Sebastian," Emma called out as he passed their door on his way to start coffee, "we're making you breakfast in bed, but you have to stay in the living room and not peek into the kitchen." "Yeah," Arya added. "It's a surprise to thank you for letting me sleep over. And Emma says surprises don't work if you see them before they're ready." Sebastian smiled, settling into his worn armchair with his first cup of coffee and listening to the sounds of two young people attempting to coordinate a cooking project. There were muffled discussions about which pan to use, gentle debates about the proper pancake to chocolate chip ratio, and the occasional clatter of utensils being retrieved from drawers. At 9:30, his phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. "Conference call finished earlier than expected. Would it be terribly presumptuous of me to accept that breakfast invitation? I could bring fresh fruit and real maple syrup." Sebastian texted back, "Not presumptuous at all. The girls are currently creating what they're calling a gratitude breakfast. Perfect timing." 20 minutes later, Vivian stood at Sebastian's door, looking more relaxed than he had ever seen her. She wore jeans and a soft sweater instead of her usual business attire. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and she carried a grocery bag that smelled of fresh strawberries and pastries from what was obviously an expensive bakery. "Mommy!" Arya rushed to the door, throwing her arms around Vivian with uninhibited joy. "You're just in time. We made special pancakes and Emma taught me how to scramble eggs without making them rubbery." Vivian hugged her daughter tightly, and Sebastian caught a glimpse of tears in her eyes as she breathed in the scent of Arya's hair and felt the solid warmth of her in a way that was clearly both familiar and precious. "I've missed you, little one," Vivian said softly. "I missed you too, but I wasn't lonely," Arya replied with the honesty that continued to characterize all her observations. "Emma and Sebastian made sure I felt like part of their family." Over breakfast, Sebastian watched Vivian discover aspects of her daughter that had apparently been hidden beneath the careful politeness of their usual interactions. Away from the pressure of work schedules and formal environments, Arya was animated and silly, chattering about everything from the movie they had watched to the elaborate plans she and Emma were developing for a summer art project. "And Sebastian taught us both how to make pancakes that look like different animals," Arya explained, cutting her butterfly-shaped pancake with scientific precision. "We're going to make a whole zoo eventually, with elephants and butterflies." And maybe even giraffes, though Sebastian says those might be too tall for our pan. That sounds like quite an ambitious culinary project, Vivian said. And Sebastian could see her relaxing into the gentle chaos of their conversation. Emma, who had been observing Vivian with the careful attention she brought to all new adults, apparently decided that Aria's mother had passed some internal assessment. Aria talks about you all the time, she said matter-of-factly. She says you're really smart and that you work hard to take care of lots of people, not just her. Vivian looked surprised by the directness of Emma's comment. What else does she say about me? That she wishes she could help you not work so much because she thinks you get tired, and that she hopes someday you can come to more of her school things because the other moms seem to have fun at those events. The honesty of Emma's relay hit the table like a small stone dropped into still water, creating ripples of recognition and understanding. Sebastian saw Vivian's expression shift as she processed this glimpse into her daughter's unfiltered thoughts. Aria, Vivian said gently, I didn't know you worried about me working too much. Aria put down her fork and looked at her mother with serious green eyes. I don't worry exactly. But sometimes I wish we could have regular time together like this, where we're not rushing or thinking about meetings or phone calls. Just being together because we want to be. Is that what you've been doing here with Sebastian and Emma? Just being together? Being together? Aria nodded enthusiastically. We cook and do homework and talk about things that are interesting or funny or sometimes sad. And nobody checks their phone during dinner. And bedtime stories happen every night, even if it's been a long day. Sebastian felt his chest tighten as he recognized the implicit contrast Aria was drawing between the routine they had created and her usual experiences at home. Vivian was quiet for a long moment, then reached across the table to take Aria's hand. I owe you an apology, sweetheart. I've been so focused on providing for our future that I haven't been paying enough attention to our present. You don't need to apologize, Mommy. You work hard because you love me. But maybe we could find ways to work a little less hard and still love each other just as much. The wisdom and grace in Aria's response left all the adults at the table momentarily speechless. Sebastian marveled at this young person's capacity for understanding complex adult motivations while still advocating for her own needs with such gentle clarity. Sebastian, Vivian said, turning to face him directly, I need you to know how profoundly grateful I am for what you've given both of us. Not just the practical childcare, though that has been invaluable, but you've shown Aria what stable family life looks like, and you've shown me what I've been missing by being so consumed with work obligations. Sebastian felt uncomfortable being the focus of such intense gratitude. I haven't done anything extraordinary. I just provided the kind of care any young person deserves. That's exactly what makes it extraordinary, Vivian replied. You saw a lonely little girl and responded with consistent kindness and attention, without any expectation of recognition or reward. You researched resources to help our family when you could have simply minded your own business. And you've created a space where Aria feels secure enough to be completely herself. She paused, looking around Sebastian's small apartment with its mismatched furniture and homemade decorations. This place has more warmth and genuine care than any of the expensive environments I've been able to provide for her. You've reminded me that love isn't demonstrated through luxury. It's demonstrated through presence. And, Aria added, apparently feeling that something important was missing from her mother's thanks. Sebastian never makes me feel like I'm bothering him when I have questions or when I need help with things. Even when I'm sad or scared, he doesn't tell me those feelings are inconvenient or that I should save them for later. The comment was delivered without accusation, but Sebastian could see its impact on Vivian's face. He realized that Aria was offering her mother a roadmap for the kind of emotional availability she craved, delivered with the generosity of someone who still believed in the possibility of positive change. You're right, Vivian said quietly. Feelings should never be inconvenient, and I'm sorry if I've made you feel like they were. As they finished breakfast and cleaned up together, Vivian insisting on washing dishes while the girls dried, and Sebastian put everything away, Sebastian felt a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with accomplishment and everything to do with witness. He was watching a family rediscover itself, seeing a mother recognize what mattered most to her daughter, observing the small moments of connection that would hopefully reshape their relationship going forward. When it came time for Vivian and Aria to leave, Aria hugged Sebastian with the fierce attachment of someone who had found security in unexpected places. "Thank you for making me part of your family," she whispered. "And thank you for helping my mommy remember how to have breakfast without looking at her phone." Sebastian hugged her back, feeling the weight of responsibility and privilege that came with being trusted by someone so young and resilient. "Thank you for reminding me why family meals matter so much," he replied. 6 months later, Sebastian stood in the familiar marble hallway of the North Point Financial Center's 49th floor, but this time he wasn't carrying a mop bucket. He wore his best khaki pants and button-down shirt, and in his hands was a small framed photograph that Aria had asked him to hang in what she now called our special place. The photograph showed 4 people around Sebastian's kitchen table. Emma and Aria grinning over plates of elephant-shaped pancakes, Sebastian with his arm around both girls, and Vivian laughing at something Emma had just said. It had been taken during one of their regular Sunday morning breakfasts, which had evolved into a weekly tradition that none of them wanted to miss. "It's perfect right there," Aria said, pointing to a spot on the wall where the evening light would catch the glass. She was taller now, more confident, and when she spoke about waiting in this hallway, it was with the matter-of-fact tone of someone describing ancient history rather than a painful memory. Sebastian hung the picture carefully, then stepped back to admire their work. The hallway looked different now, warmer somehow, as if the memory of connection had changed the very atmosphere of the space. "You know," Frank said, joining them with his characteristic grin, "this whole situation started something interesting." "Around here?" Sebastian looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" "Well, after word got around about how you helped the Corley family figure out better solutions, other people started paying attention differently. That lawyer on the 30th floor whose son was having trouble in school. She asked Dr. Walsh for resources after hearing about your situation. The accounting firm manager who was struggling with eldercare for his father. Same thing. Vivian, who had been watching Aria show Emma around her former waiting spot, turned to join their conversation. "It's true. The Family Resource Center tells me they've had more referrals from our building in the past 6 months than they typically see in 2 years. Apparently, people just needed to know that asking for help wasn't admitting failure." Sebastian felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with recognition and everything to do with the knowledge that small acts of care could ripple outward in ways he never could have imagined. What had started as simple concern for one lonely little girl had somehow created permission for an entire community of working parents to seek the support they needed. "The best part," Emma added, having overheard the adult conversation with the keen attention she brought to anything involving her expanded family, "is that now there are lots of other kids who don't have to wait alone in empty places anymore." Aria nodded seriously. "And their parents probably sleep better at night, like my mommy does now." As they prepared to leave the building together, heading to Sebastian's apartment for their traditional Sunday dinner, Sebastian reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this moment. A year ago, he had been a solitary janitor following a routine that barely intersected with the lives of others. Tonight, he was part of a chosen family that had taught him the difference between loneliness and solitude, between providing and caring, between getting by and thriving. The arrangement had evolved in ways none of them had originally envisioned. Sebastian now worked flexible hours that allowed him to be present for both girls' school events. Vivian had restructured her schedule to protect their Sunday mornings and Wednesday evening dinners as sacred family time. Emma had gained a sister friend who challenged her thinking and shared her love of elaborate art projects. And Arya had discovered that security didn't come from being perfect or patient, but from being surrounded by people who showed up consistently and loved her exactly as she was. "Sebastian," Arya said as they walked toward the parking garage, "do you remember that first night when you asked if I felt lonely?" "I remember. I was so lonely then that I thought lonely was just how kids like me were supposed to feel. But now I know that nobody has to feel that way, because there are always people who will care if you give them the chance to." Sebastian smiled, thinking about how much wisdom this remarkable young person had gained through her experiences of both isolation and connection. "You're absolutely right. Sometimes we just have to be brave enough to let people see when we need help." As their small group emerged into the evening air, Sebastian looked back once at the building that had been the setting for both Arya's loneliest moments and the beginning of their unconventional family story. Tomorrow, other working parents would pass through those halls, some of them carrying burdens they didn't know how to share. But now there was a network of support waiting to be discovered, and a photograph hanging in a marble hallway as quiet testimony to the truth that no one has to face their challenges alone. The greatest transformations, Sebastian had learned, didn't announce themselves with fanfare or dramatic gestures. They grew quietly, in the space between a young person's tears and an adult's decision to care, in the pause between recognizing a need and choosing to respond to it. They flourished in kitchen conversations and bedtime stories, in the patient building of trust between strangers who decided to become family. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.